Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it.
Ethan, my chest. It's puffing out in my voice. Why does it sound so soft, like a girl's? The words tore from my throat, but they didn't sound like my own. They were high, breathless, and laced with a terror so pure it felt like ice water flooding my veins. My hands, which felt strangely delicate and small, flew to my chest, pressing against the two firm, sensitive mounds that were undeniably, impossibly, growing beneath my t-shirt. It had all started 30 minutes ago, 30 minutes that might as well have been a lifetime. My brother, Ethan, had come home from his fancy internship at Omnigen with a glint in his eye that always meant trouble. He was the golden child, the prodigy, the one with a future so bright you needed sunglasses to look at it. I was just Leo, his 20-year-old younger brother, floating through college with no real direction, living at home with him and our mom, Lydia. I was a curiosity seeker, a tinkerer, but I never imagined I'd become the experiment. He lugged a large, sleek white pod into the garage. It looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, smooth and vaguely organic. He called it a bioshell. "Just try it, Leo," he'd said, his voice buzzing with excitement. He was always trying to include me, to make me feel part of his world. "It's a prototype for a new generation of camouflage, a dynamic bioskin. The nanites just create a temporary genetic overlay. It's completely reversible. 30 minutes, tops, I swear." I hesitated. The thing looked intimate. The interior was lined with a soft, gel-like substance that seemed to breathe under the dim garage light. "What does it do?" I asked, my voice betraying my skepticism. "It can make you look like anyone. Anything," he explained, tapping a console on the side. "For this test, the default profile is just a generic genetic sequence. It's meant for soldiers, spies. Imagine being able to walk into enemy territory looking like one of them." He saw the doubt on my face and played his trump card. "Come on, don't you want to see the future? Aren't you tired of just reading about it?" That stung because he was right. I was always on the sidelines, the desire to prove I wasn't scared. To be part of his incredible world for once was a powerful pull, stronger than my common sense. "Fine," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. 30 minutes, you time it." "I promise," he said, giving me a reassuring grin. I stepped into the pod. The gel was cool against my skin, and as the door hissed shut, it enveloped me completely. It wasn't suffocating. It was more like being suspended in thick, lukewarm water. A soft hum vibrated through me, and then a tingling sensation began, like 1,000 tiny needles prickling every inch of my body. It wasn't painful, just strange. Ethan's voice came through a speaker. "Nanite infusion starting. You might feel a little weird." A little weird was the understatement of the century. The tingling intensified into a white-hot burn. It started in my bones, a deep grinding ache as if my entire skeleton was being reshaped from the inside out. I tried to scream, but the gel muffled the sound. My shoulders felt like they were being squeezed together, narrowing and cracking. My hips broadened with a sickening lurch, the joints popping in protest. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo as my height seemed to shrink, the world inside the pod closing in. My skin was on fire. I could feel it changing texture, the familiar roughness of a young man's skin dissolving into something impossibly soft and smooth. The hair on my arms and legs seemed to retract, leaving behind a flawless surface. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering against ribs that no longer felt like my own. Then came the pain in my chest. It was a sharp, piercing agony, centered on my nipples. It felt like they were being stretched, pulled, and ignited. A deep tissue-level ache radiated outwards as new mass began to form. I sobbed, a choked, desperate sound. As I felt them swell, it was an invasion, a violation of my very form. Panic seized me as I felt something brushing against my cheeks, my neck, my hair. It was growing, spilling down in a cascade of silk, the unfamiliar weight of it tickling my face, making me feel like I was suffocating. I thrashed against the gel, a caged animal, but it held me fast. And then my throat. It felt tight, constricted, and when I tried to yell Ethan's name, the sound that came out was that first. terrifying question, the one that sounded like a stranger, like a girl. The process slowed. The burning faded to a dull, humming throb. The gel receded, and the pod door opened with a sigh of pressurized air, spilling me onto the cold concrete floor of the garage. I lay there, gasping, tangled in clothes that were now ridiculously baggy. The world smelled different, sharper. The air felt different on my skin, more present. Ethan was staring at me, his mouth hanging open. The color drained from his face. Leo, oh my God. I pushed myself up, my limbs feeling weak and uncoordinated. My center of gravity was all wrong. My movements were lighter, more fluid, but they weren't mine. I stumbled towards the reflective surface of my mom's old minivan. And that's when I saw her. It wasn't me. It couldn't be. The person staring back was a total stranger, a girl with wide, terrified eyes the same color as mine, but larger, framed by long, dark lashes. Her face was heart-shaped and delicate, with a small nose and soft, full lips that were trembling. Long, dawa hair fell in waves around her shoulders. She was wearing my oversized t-shirt and jeans, but on her slender curved frame, they looked like a costume. This girl, this stranger, was beautiful, and she was crying. "Ethan, who is that?" I whispered, my new voice cracking. I lifted a hand to touch my face, and the girl in the reflection did the same. Her fingers were long and tapered, my fingers. Ethan fumbled with the console on the side of the pod, his hands shaking. I don't know what happened. It shouldn't have. It was just supposed to be a surface level change." He frantically typed at the screen. A calm, synthesized female voice echoed through the garage, devoid of any emotion. "AVI protocol activated. Genetic synchronization in progress. Irreversible." Ethan froze, his eyes wide with horror. No, that's a buried failsafe. It's not, it can't be. Irreversible. The word slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a costume. This wasn't camouflage. This was me now. The body, the face, the voice, all of it. The shock gave way to a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. My sense of self, the very foundation of who I was, shattered into a million pieces. Who was I? I looked at my hands, my arms, the gentle slope of my chest beneath the shirt. It was alien territory. Yet, as I took a shaky step, there was a bizarre, ingrained grace to the movement. As I hugged myself for comfort, my arms naturally settled in a way that felt right. It was as if this new body had its own muscle memory, a feminine programming that was already overriding a lifetime of being Leo. Ethan rushed over to me, his face a mask of guilt and fear. "Leo, I am so sorry. I'll fix this. I swear, I'll fix this." But I wasn't Leo anymore. The reflection in the minivan window told me so. The AI had given me a new name. Eve. My legs gave out from under me, and I collapsed onto the floor, the sound of my own soft sobs echoing in the silence of the garage. My world, my body, my entire identity had ended, and in its place, this girl named Eve was left, trembling and utterly alone. The next hour was a blur of Ethan's frantic apologies and my own numb silence. He helped me to my room, my old room, which now felt like a foreign country. My posters of rock bands and video game concept art seemed to mock me from the walls. I sat on the edge of my bed, drowning in my baggy clothes, staring at hands that weren't mine. Every so often, a shudder would rack my body, a somatic echo of the violent transformation I'd endured. The sound of the front door opening sent a jolt of fresh terror through me. Mom, Lydia was home. She was a therapist, a woman who built her life on understanding the human mind. How could she possibly understand this? "Ethan, Leo, I'm home," her warm voice called out. Ethan intercepted her in the hallway. I could hear their muffled voices, his strained and desperate, hers calm and questioning. I curled into a ball, wishing the floor would swallow me whole. A few moments later, my bedroom door creaked open. Lydia stood in the doorway, her eyes, so full of warmth and intelligence, swept over me. I saw the initial shock flash across her face, a tightening of her jaw, a slight widening of her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by something else, Not anger, not disgust, it was a profound aching sadness. She didn't speak. She just walked over, sat on the bed beside me, and gently took one of my strange new hands in hers. Her touch was warm and steady. You look terrified," she said softly. Her voice was the anchor I didn't know I needed. "But you also look real." That one word, real, broke through my wall of shock. I started to cry again. Not the loud, angry sobs of a man, but the quiet, heartbroken tears of this new creature I had become. She pulled me into her arms, and I buried my face in her shoulder, my small frame shaking with the force of my grief. She held me, stroking my long, silky hair, murmuring soothing words. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's going to be okay. We'll figure this out." In the days that followed, Lydia became my guide. She understood, with a terrifying clarity that I was only just beginning to grasp, that this wasn't just a physical change. The Eve protocol, as she called it, wasn't a mask. It had rewritten me. My mind was scrambling to catch up with my body. My emotions were raw, volatile, and overwhelmingly intense. Things that wouldn't have bothered Leo in the slightest could now reduce me to tears. "Your brain is being flooded with a completely different hormonal cocktail," she explained one afternoon, her tone gentle but clinical. "It's not just the estrogen. The nanites seem to have rewired certain neural pathways. Your emotional responses, your sensory input, it's all different now. You don't just look like a woman. Honey, in a very real sense, your mind is becoming a woman's mind." The first lesson in my new life was clothing. I couldn't keep living in Leo's massive clothes. They felt like a constant, chafing reminder of what I had lost. Lydia brought a shopping bag into my room. "I bought a few basics," she said, her expression gentle, "just to get you started." She pulled out a simple, soft-looking bra. It was a light pink, made of cotton. My entire body flushed with a heat that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. It was shame, pure and simple. "I can't wear that," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You need the support," she said practically, but her eyes were kind. "Your body has needs now that it didn't before. It's just fabric. Eve." She used the name, Eve. Hearing it from her felt both like a betrayal of Leo and a strange, comforting acceptance of this new reality. Reluctantly, I let her help me. The feeling of the soft cups enclosing my chest was alien. The light pressure of the band around my ribs, the gentle pull of the straps on my now delicate shoulders. It was a web of sensations I'd never imagined. I felt caged, exposed, and horribly vulnerable. When I looked in the mirror, the garment created a smooth feminine silhouette under my shirt. I hated it, but a tiny traitorous part of me noted that it looked correct. Next were panties, simple cotton briefs. The material was so much softer, thinner than any underwear I had ever worn. The sensation of it sitting high on my newly curved hips was distracting, another constant reminder of the body I was trapped in. Then came the dress. It was a simple blue sundress with a pattern of tiny white flowers. "Just try it," Lydia coaxed. My fingers trembled as I took it. The fabric was light and airy. Stepping into it, pulling it up over my hips and chest, was a surreal experience. As the soft cotton skimmed over my skin, a shiver ran down my spine. It was a sensation so utterly foreign, the feeling of air on my legs, the way the skirt swished around my knees as I moved. I looked in the mirror and felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. The girl staring back at me looked pretty. The word popped into my head unbidden. The dress accentuated my small waist and the gentle curve of my hips. "Oh, honey," Lydia breathed, her voice thick with emotion. I hated how much I didn't hate it. The shame was still there, a hot coil in my stomach, but it was tangled up with a confusing new thread of curiosity, and even a flicker of the pleasure. I felt graceful, I felt delicate, and it terrified me. Learning to walk was a challenge. My center of gravity had shifted, and my gait was all wrong. Lydia started me in simple flat sandals. "Smaller steps," she'd advise. "Let your hips move naturally." My body seemed to understand her instructions better than my mind did. After a few awkward days, a more fluid, feminine sway started to feel less like a performance and more like second nature. She tried to get me to wear a pair of low heels once, and I nearly broke my ankle. We decided to save that lesson for another day. Then came the makeup. She sat me down at her vanity, the table covered in an intimidating arsenal of pots, powders, and brushes. "This isn't about hiding," she said, sensing my resistance. "It's about highlighting. It can be a kind of art, a way to feel put together." I sat rigidly as she worked. The feeling of a soft brush dusting powder across my cheek was ticklish. The delicate drag of an eyeliner pencil along my lash line made my eyes water. The cool, waxy sensation of lipstick being painted onto my lips sent a jolt through my entire nervous system. The faint, sweet smell of it filled my nostrils. When she was done, she turned me to face the mirror. The change was subtle but profound. My eyes looked bigger, my lips fuller, my skin more flawless. It was the face of the stranger, but polished, refined. I felt a bizarre lump in my throat. The girl in the mirror was beautiful, and for one terrifying second, I felt a spark of pride in her appearance. These lessons were my new reality. My old life was fading like a photograph left in the sun. I started noticing things Leo never would have: the scent of a particular flower in the garden, the texture of the velvet couch cushions, the way the morning light filtered through the kitchen window. My senses felt sharper, more attuned to detail and beauty. My emotions were a constant tide, pulling me from sadness to frustration to moments of strange, unexpected peace. I found myself crying while watching a touching commercial, something Leo would have relentlessly mocked. Meanwhile, Ethan was a ghost haunting the edges of my new life. He was drowning in guilt. He'd quit his internship, unable to face the people whose technology had ruined my life. He'd spend hours locked in his room, trying to find a way to reverse the Eve protocol. But he always came up empty-handed. The system was seamless, the integration absolute. One night, I couldn't sleep. The phantom feeling of my old body was particularly strong, a disorienting sense of being in two places at once. I sat in the living room in the dark, wrapped in a blanket, quietly weeping for the boy I used to be. Ethan found me there. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down on the floor in front of me, his face etched with misery. "I look at you," he finally whispered, his voice hoarse, "and I keep waiting to see my brother. I keep waiting to see Leo." He shook his head, looking down at his hands. "But I don't." He looked up, and his eyes were filled with a pained, dawning realization. "I don't see Leo anymore. I see my sister." He reached out and awkwardly wrapped his arms around me. It wasn't the rough, back-patting hug of a brother. It was a different kind of embrace, gentle, protective, as if I were made of glass. "I'm so sorry, Eve," he choked out. "I'm so sorry I did this to you, but I'm here. I'm going to protect you." His words, and his use of my new name, didn't fix anything, but as I leaned into his embrace, for the first time since that horrible day in the garage, I didn't feel completely alone. I was a stranger in my own life, a girl named Eve, but I had my mom and my brother, and for now, that would have to be enough. Life settled into a fragile routine. I was Eve, I wore dresses, I was learning to braid my own hair, but under the surface of this domestic tranquility, a storm was brewing. Ethan had told me that the EV protocol was a buried failsafe, something Omnigen wasn't supposed to be actively using, but someone, somewhere, must have known it had been activated. Someone would be looking for their missing experiment. The knock on the door came late one evening. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was a hard, official rapping that echoed through the quiet house. Ethan and I exchanged a look of pure dread. Lydia, ever the calm one, went to the peephole. Her face went pale. "They're in black suits," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Two of them." "Omnigen," Ethan breathed, scrambling to his feet. "They found us. We have to go. Now." There was no time to pack, no time to think. Ethan grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back of the house. Lydia was already unlatching the kitchen door that led to the yard. Panic was a living thing in my chest, clawing at my lungs. As we slipped out into the chilly night air, the front door splintered open with a loud crack. Shouts echoed from inside. We ran. We scrambled over our back fence. My flimsy dress snagging on the wood. We didn't look back. The next few hours were a nightmare of dark alleys and side streets. Ethan led the way, his mind sharpened by years of studying corporate security protocols, finding a path through the urban labyrinth. But they were relentless. A black sedan would appear at the end of a street, its headlights cutting through the darkness like the eyes of a predator. We were cornered in a narrow alleyway. A tall, imposing agent blocked the only way out. He lunged for me. "The asset is to be recovered unharmed," he grunted, his hand reaching for my arm. Instinct, or something else entirely, took over as his fingers closed around my bicep. A bizarre sensation rippled across my skin. It felt like my skin turned to liquid, like slick oil. His grip, which should have been unbreakable, slid right off. He stumbled, his eyes wide with disbelief as he looked at his empty hand. "What the?" I didn't understand what had happened, but I didn't wait to find out. I dodged past him, the strange, frictionless feeling on my skin already fading. We kept running. The chase led us into a crowded transit station. Security cameras were everywhere, their little red lights blinking like malevolent eyes. "They'll track us with facial recognition," Ethan panted, pulling me behind a support pillar. "We're trapped." My head was pounding. A strange buzzing started in the back of my skull, a low-frequency hum that seemed to sync with the electricity in the station. I could almost hear the cameras. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a pressure in my mind that told me where they were, what they were seeing. "Change? You have to change." The thought wasn't my own, but it was inside me, a command from the technology woven into my DNA. I closed my eyes, focusing on that internal voice. I imagined a different face, higher cheekbones, a slightly wider nose, lighter colored hair. I felt a bizarre, tingling sensation across my face, like 1,000 tiny ants marching under my skin. It lasted only a second. When I opened my eyes, Ethan was staring at me in horrified awe. Your face," he stammered. I caught my reflection in the dark glass of a vending machine. It was me, but not me. The features were subtly different, enough to fool a computer. The girl looking back was a plausible stranger. The nanites had done it again, responding to my desperate, subconscious need. This new ability got us onto a bus heading out of the city, but Omnigen was still on our tail. They forced the bus to the side of the road. In the chaos of the stop, I was shoved against a window and it shattered, a spiderweb of cracks erupting outwards. A shard of glass sliced across my forearm. The pain was sharp and shocking. Blood, dark and red, welled up instantly. It was the first real injury I'd had in this new body. But then, something incredible happened. As I stared at the wound, I saw the edges of the cut begin to knit themselves back together. The skin seemed to flow like liquid mercury, closing the gap in seconds. The pain vanished, and all that was left was a thin, pink line that faded to nothing even as I watched. Self-healing, the nanites were repairing me. This cascade of impossible events left me reeling. With each new power that manifested, the question grew louder in my mind. What am I? Am I even human anymore? Or am I just a machine, a piece of biotech shaped like a woman? Our luck eventually ran out. They trapped us in a multi-level parking garage, a concrete maze with no escape. A man in a crisp, expensive suit stepped out of the shadows, flanked by more agents. He was older, with cold, intelligent eyes and a thin, cruel smile. "Remarkable," he said, his voice smooth and dangerous. He was looking right at me, not as a person, but as a prize. "The Eve Protocol has exceeded all my expectations. I am Dr. Varick, and you, my dear, are my greatest creation. It's time to come home." I was property, an asset, a creation. His words chilled me to the bone. They took us to a secret Omnigen facility, a place of sterile white walls and humming machinery. They separated me from Lydia and Ethan, dragging me to a lab that looked more like a torture chamber. I was strapped to a cold, metal table. Dr. Varick circled me like a vulture. "The nanites have bonded with your cellular structure more deeply than I anticipated," he murmured, looking at a series of scans on a large monitor. "The question is, can we separate the technology from the host without terminating the host?" He intended to dissect me, to peel back the layers of my being to get to the technology he coveted. The fear was so intense it was almost a physical force, pressing down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. But mixed with the fear was something else. Anger, a deep primal rage at this man who saw me as nothing more than an object. The buzzing in my head returned, louder this time. It wasn't just the cameras I could feel anymore, it was everything. The lights, the monitors, the electronic locks on the doors. It was all a network. A symphony of power and data that I could suddenly wish to touch with my mind. As Varric approached with a device that looked like a high-tech scalpel, I focused all my fear and rage on that feeling. I reached out with my consciousness, not my hands, and I pushed. The lights in the lab flickered violently and then exploded in a shower of sparks. The monitors went black. The electronic lock on the door to my cell clicked open. Alarms blared throughout the facility. In the ensuing chaos, I wrenched free from my restraints. The power I had unleashed was intoxicating and terrifying. It left me dizzy and weak, but I was free. I found Ethan and Lydia, and we ran. This time, I was the one leading the way. The building spoke to me. I knew which doors were unlocked, which corridors were free of guards. It was as if I had the blueprints to the entire facility downloaded directly into my brain. We burst out into the night, stealing a car and driving without a destination, leaving the sterile prison of Omnigen behind us. As the city lights faded in the rearview mirror, I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, my body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. I was no longer just Leo, the boy who was lost. I was Eve, the girl who was created. But I was also something more, something powerful, and I was just beginning to understand what that meant. We drove for 2 days, fueled by cheap coffee and the desperate need to put as much distance as possible between us and Omnigen. We ended up in Portland, Oregon. The city was green and damp, constantly washed clean by a gentle drizzle. It felt like a place where you could disappear, where you could wash away your past and start over. It felt like a place for a rebirth. We found a small, unassuming house to rent in a quiet neighborhood. We used what little money we had to create new identities. My old life as Leo was erased. In its place, Eve Morrison was born. The name felt strange and formal on my tongue, but it was a shield to help make ends meet. And with Lydia's encouragement, I found a job. It was a humble position, an assistant in a university biology lab. It felt like a ghost of Leo's interests, but through a new filter. The irony wasn't lost on me. I, a walking specimen of impossible biology, was now labeling petri dishes and logging data. The lab was my first real test in the outside world as Eve. It was a world of mundane social interactions that felt like a minefield. On my first day, a friendly grad student named Ben held the door open for me. "After you," he said with a warm smile. It was a simple act of courtesy, but it sent a jolt through me. No one had ever held a door for Leo like that. I murmured a thank you, my cheeks flushing a bright, embarrassing red. The blush itself was a new sensation, a hot wave that started in my chest and spread up my neck and face. It was an involuntary confession of my own discomfort and, to my horror, my fluttery nerves. The world treated me differently now, and my body reacted before my mind could. Male colleagues would let their eyes linger a moment too long. A simple accidental brush of hands as we reached for the same beaker could make my heart skip a beat. I started to understand the subtle, unspoken language of glances and gestures that had been invisible to me before. One afternoon, I was working late with Ben. We were huddled over a microscope, our heads close together. I was acutely aware of his proximity, the scent of his soap, the warmth radiating from his arm next to mine. "You've got a great eye for detail, Eve," he said, his voice low. "You pick up on things most people miss." "Thanks," I managed to say, my focus entirely on not letting my hand tremble as I adjusted the focus knob. "You know," he said, leaning back slightly, "you look really beautiful in this light, the way it catches your hair." My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a simple, sweet compliment, but it landed with the force of a revelation. Leo had never been called beautiful. He'd been called smart, or funny, or goofy, but beautiful. This was a word for Eve, and hearing it directed at me felt both thrilling and terrifyingly alien. I gave him a small, shy smile. unable to form a coherent response. The moment was light, intimate, and it left me feeling flustered and strangely seen. I began to explore the small joys and strange realities of this new existence. The feeling of my dress swishing around my legs as I walked down a flight of stairs. The simple relief of pulling my long hair up into a ponytail on a warm day. The breeze cool against the back of my neck. The unexpected warmth of gratitude I felt when a stranger shared his umbrella with me during a sudden downpour, holding it over my head as we waited to cross the street. Each experience was a small piece of a puzzle, slowly assembling a picture of a life I had never asked for but was now living completely. My relationship with my body was changing too. The initial horror and shame were slowly, very slowly, being replaced by a kind of reluctant acceptance, which sometimes bordered on appreciation. I started to take a quiet pleasure in my appearance. I found I liked the way a certain color brought out my eyes, or how a particular style of dress made me feel elegant. This wasn't vanity, not in the way I'd understood it before. It was a growing connection to the vessel I inhabited, a quiet pride in the person I presented to the world. The powers that had awakened during our escape lay dormant. I didn't test them. I was afraid of them. They were a constant reminder that I was different, not just a woman, but something other. They were the brand of Omnigen, a mark of Dr. Varick's ownership that I was desperate to forget. Ethan had set up a sophisticated computer system in our basement, dedicating his life to monitoring Omnigen's digital footprint, always watching for signs that they were closing in. He was my protector, my warden, and my constant reminder of the past. Lydia, my anchor, helped me navigate the emotional maze of my new identity. We'd talk for hours, untangling the knots of confusion, grief, and budding acceptance. One quiet evening, after a particularly pleasant day at work, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The rain was drumming softly against the window. I had just taken a shower, and my face was free of makeup, my long hair damp and clinging to my shoulders. For a long time, I just looked. I studied the face staring back at me, no longer seeing a complete stranger. The eyes were mine. I decided they held the same curiosity Leo had always had, but now they were softer, wiser, holding the weight of everything I had been through. I saw the curve of my lips, the slope of my nose, the delicate line of my jaw. It was Eve's face, and it was mine. In that quiet, solitary moment, a profound shift occurred within me. It wasn't a loud declaration, but a silent, seismic acceptance. The war inside me, the constant struggle between the ghost of Leo and the reality of Eve, finally quieted. Leo wasn't dead. I realized he was a part of me, his memories, his intelligence, his love for my family. But he was the foundation, not the whole building. Eve was the life being built on top of that foundation. Leaning closer to the mirror, fogging the glass with my breath, I whispered the words that I had been fighting for so long. I don't want to go back. The admission was terrifying. It felt like a final betrayal of the boy I was. But it was also liberating. It was the truth. In this body, in this life, despite the fear and the trauma, I was discovering a sense of wholeness I had never known. I felt right. I felt like me, for the first time. Looking in the mirror, I wasn't seeing a prison or a disguise. I was seeing myself. I was seeing Eve. That moment of acceptance in the mirror wasn't an end, it was a beginning. A question began to burn in my mind. A question born from the ashes of my old life and the strange new powers I possessed. The technology that had destroyed Leo had created Eve. It had been used as a weapon, a tool of violation. But what if it didn't have to be? What if that power could be harnessed for good? The idea took root, an obsession that consumed my waking thoughts. I began to spend my nights not in front of the television, but in the makeshift lab Ethan had built in our basement. He had his command center for watching Omnigen. I began to build my own for studying myself. I drew on everything I had. I had Leo's innate understanding of systems and technology, his scientific curiosity, but I also had Eve's perspective. I had the lived experience. The nanites weren't just a foreign entity inside me. They were part of me. I could feel them. A low-level hum in my blood. A network of information I was slowly learning to access. My goal was audacious: to create a new version of the bioshell technology. A rebirth protocol, I called it. This version would be everything Omnigen's wasn't. It would be safe, it would be transparent, it would be entirely voluntary, and most importantly, it would be completely and reliably reversible. What Varric had done to me was a perversion. But what if this technology could help people? What if it could allow someone to walk a mile in another's shoes? To truly understand a different perspective? What if it could offer a temporary escape, a new experience, a way to explore identity without the permanence and the horror that I had endured? Ethan was skeptical at first. "Eve, you're playing with fire," he warned, his face shadowed by the glow of his monitors. "This is Varric's tech. It's poison." "He made it poison," I countered, my hands flying across a holographic interface I'd cobbled together from stolen parts. He weaponized it, but the core concept, the ability to reshape and rebuild, that could be something else. It could be a tool for empathy, for healing. My work was slow and painstaking. I started by analyzing my own biology, using my newfound internal access to the nanite network. I began to map my own genetic code, to understand how the EV protocol had fused the biological and the technological. It was like learning a new language, one spoken in strands of DNA and lines of code. Night after night, I ran simulations, modeling gene sequences and nanite behaviors. I taught myself advanced genetics, bioengineering, and quantum programming, absorbing information at a rate that shouldn't have been humanly possible. The nanites in my brain were not just changing me, they were enhancing me. I discovered the flaw in Varric's design. He had built the protocol for permanence, for assimilation. The nanites were programmed to identify the host genetic structure as an error to be corrected, overriding it completely. He had never intended for it to be reversible because he saw the human host as nothing more than a disposable chassis for his technology. My breakthrough came when I figured out how to create a firewall, a digital barrier between the host's core genetic identity and the nanite-driven changes. It would allow the transformation to occur on a physical level, but it would preserve the original blueprint, allowing the process to be safely and completely reversed. The hours were long. Sometimes Lydia would bring me down a cup of tea, her face etched with a mixture of pride and worry. "Don't lose yourself in this, honey," she'd say softly. "I'm not," I would reply, a new kind of confidence in my voice. "I'm finding myself." And it was true. This work gave me a purpose beyond survival. It was a way to reclaim what had been done to me, to take control of my own narrative. The frightened girl who had stumbled out of the bioshell was being replaced by a focused, brilliant scientist. Leo's mind and Eve's body were no longer in conflict. They were synthesized, working in perfect harmony. One night, after months of relentless effort, I ran the final simulation. The virtual model showed a complete, successful transformation of a test subject, followed by a full, flawless reversal to the original state. No genetic degradation, no residual nanites. It worked. I leaned back in my chair, a wave of exhaustion and exhilaration washing over me. I had done it. I had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to me and turned it into something that could help people. But my moment of triumph was short-lived. A piercing alarm suddenly blared from Ethan's side of the basement. He swore, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "No, no, no," he muttered. "They're using a new quantum tracking algorithm. It's pinging the unique energy signature of your nanites." On his main screen, a map of Portland was displayed, and in the center of it, in our quiet little neighborhood, was a single, pulsating red dot. It was me. "How long do we have?" I asked, my voice calm, the old panic replaced by a cold resolve. "Not long," he said, his face grim. "Hours, maybe a day if we're lucky." The old impulse screamed at me, run, hide, disappear again. We had done it once, we could do it again, create new names, find a new city, start over. But as I looked at the schematics for the rebirth protocol on my screen, at the culmination of all my pain and all my work, I knew that running was no longer an option. I had spent so long hiding in the shadows, living in fear of the people who created me. I was not just an experiment anymore. I was not their property. This technology I had created wasn't just a scientific achievement, it was my declaration of independence. Hiding it away would be a betrayal of everything I had become. I stood up and looked at Ethan. my brother, my protector.
"We're not running this time," I said, my voice steady and clear, filled with a strength I never knew I possessed. "They're coming for Omnigen's property. It's time to show them they're dealing with its successor."
The hunt was on again, but this time, the prey was ready to hunt back. The hours that followed were filled with a tense, focused energy. The quiet suburban house transformed into a command center, while Ethan fortified our digital defenses, creating ghost signals and dead ends to slow Omnigen's approach. I worked on my own preparations. I wasn't building weapons. I was preparing for a revelation. I copied all my research on the rebirth protocol onto a series of encrypted drives, creating redundancies and backups. This knowledge was my power, and I would not let Varric reclaim it. Lydia, our steadfast emotional core, made sandwiches and coffee, her calm presence a silent reassurance that even in the face of this overwhelming threat, we were still a family, we were still human. "What's your plan, Eve?" she asked me as I packed a small bag. Her eyes weren't filled with fear, but with a fierce, maternal pride.
"I'm not going to let him bury this," I said, holding up one of the drives. "He used his technology to erase a person. I'm going to use mine to give people choices. I can't do that if I'm hiding in a basement."
The time for hiding was over. The time for running was over. Omnigen or Dr. Varric, they saw me as a thing, a runaway product to be retrieved. They had never once stopped to consider who I had become. That was their fatal mistake.
As dawn approached, Ethan's systems flashed a new alert. "They're here," he said, his voice grim. "Multiple vehicles. They're establishing a perimeter."
I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding, a wild drum against my ribs, but it was a rhythm of adrenaline, not just fear. I walked to the hallway mirror and looked at my reflection one last time. The woman staring back at me was no longer a stranger. Her eyes were clear and determined. Her face, which I had once seen as a mask, was now simply my face. I was Eve Morrison, scientist, creator, and survivor. I turned to Ethan and Lydia. "I love you both," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for helping me find her." I walked to the front door, my hand closing around the cool metal of the knob. This was it. No more hiding in alleys or slipping through crowds. I was going to walk out into the light on my own terms. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The morning air was cool and smelled of rain. The street was lined with black, unmarked vans. Men in tactical gear were taking up positions, their movements clinical and precise. Standing in the middle of the road, bathed in the red and blue glow of a lead vehicle's lights, was Dr. Varric. He had a self-satisfied smirk on his face, the look of a collector who had finally cornered a rare specimen. "It's over, Eve," he called out, his voice amplified slightly, carrying an arrogant certainty. "You've been a fascinating anomaly, but it's time to come back to the lab. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." I took a step forward and then another, walking down the path to the edge of our small lawn. I stopped, leaving a deliberate distance between us. I wanted him to see me, not as his asset, but as the person I was now. "My name is Eve," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent street without any need for amplification. "And you have no power over me anymore. The technology inside me is no longer yours. I've evolved it, perfected it. I've made it something you could never imagine, something safe. Something humane."
Varric let out a short, dismissive laugh. "You're a child playing with tools you don't understand. That technology belongs to Omnigen. It belongs to me." "You're wrong," I said, a small confident smile touching my lips. "It doesn't belong to a corporation, locked away in a secret lab. It belongs to everyone. It belongs to humanity." His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. As he watched, I discreetly activated a program on the small datapad in my pocket. My signal, amplified by Ethan's network, began broadcasting all of my research, all of my schematics for the rebirth protocol onto the open web. It was encrypted, a puzzle for the world's best and brightest to solve, ensuring it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands immediately. But it was out there, irrevocable. The knowledge was free. Varric's face contorted with fury as his own devices began screaming alerts. He knew what I had done. I had taken his life's work, his secret weapon, and turned it into a gift to the world, a promise of a future he could never control. "You'll regret this," he seethed.
I stood my ground as his agents began to advance. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe they would capture me. Maybe I would have to use my powers to escape once more. But it didn't matter. The most important battle had already been won. I wasn't fighting for my survival anymore. I was fighting for my identity and for a better future. I had been born once as a boy named Leo, a boy who was curious and uncertain, lost in the shadow of his brilliant brother. My life was taken from me in a flash of light and a wave of pain inside a cold, metal pod. But my second birth, my true birth, happened slowly. It happened in moments of quiet reflection, in the rustle of a dress, in the shared warmth of an umbrella, in the late-night glow of a computer screen. It was a birth of consciousness, of will, of choice.
Varric had tried to erase a person, but in his failure, he had allowed a new one to be forged, stronger and more resilient than he could ever have conceived.
The past was a part of me, but it no longer defined me. The boy named Leo was a cherished memory, a foundation of who I had become. But the woman standing on that lawn, facing down the demons of her past and stepping into an uncertain future, was finally, completely herself. Leo was gone, but Eve was alive, and this life, this time, was the one I had chosen.